All right, we are back here today talking about the Miami Hurricanes since fall camp is here for most schools around America. They're starting, their first days of hitting people with pads. It's a great sign to know that football is just right around the corner, even though, yeah, preseason football, except for that Hall of Fame game, very, very much whatever. But we're talking about, yeah, right here, DU today. But I feel like the first and foremost thing I kind of want to talk about is this was the most recent thing that occurred for the Hurricanes was the Mario Cristobal extension, which I feel like, hey, it's well deserved for him, for one. And two, it kind of puts a lot of like perspective on, a guy like him, bringing back up a program that, well, used to be really good and they kind of weren't for a little bit. Now they're really good again. Kind of really, compare that to a guy, as a Texas fan myself and Coach Steve Sarkisian, where, he's kind of done a lot of the similar things too here in Austin, where, he takes a program that, well, for the majority of my life, it was very mediocre to the occasional bad years too, with Charlie Strong. Shout out to him. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting thing. A lot of obviously they're both from the Nick Saban coaching tree is kind of one thing that people kind of forget. Obviously Chris Paul's won more playoff games than Stark, but Stark has won more conference championships than him. But that's all semantics and whatever. But yeah, I find it very very interesting a lot of that aspect. It was a conversation I had with my brother at dinner. We were just talking about it, but yeah, talk about some of your thoughts about Mario Cristobal and what he's done for this program.
No, yeah, Mario Cristobal, he's been by far a huge, without a shadow of a doubt, he's been the biggest reason as to why Miami has turned themselves around. Just like you mentioned with Texas, because I know you're a Longhorns fan, but obviously it's the same thing that Miami has had to deal with as well. Uh, obviously for most of my life, it's the same exact thing. Miami's been far off from where they used to be, which was a national collegiate powerhouse, a constant, consistent national championship contender, and obviously they fell off for a while. Um, and now this is the best that this program has been since the early 2000s. And Cristobal deserves a lot of credit for what he's done at Miami. Um, Obviously, there's been a lot of Canes fans like myself who have had some criticism with him over the years, in terms of his game management, his play calling, and what some can be perceived as a too nice attitude. I kind of felt like he was a little bit too nice earlier in his tenure here, and I sort of bit him, in the behind, if you will. That's just how I felt about him. But he's turned around himself really, really well, and I think the one thing that I've learned about him is that he's gotten better every year in terms of different aspects of coaching. His game management has gotten better. His clock management certainly has gotten better compared to what it once was. He's done a better job of being an overall CEO of the football team, and that's the number one thing, or that's the number one qualification that a head coach should have, and that should be needed, is someone who is great at overseeing the whole operation of the football team, and someone who's basically guiding the ship in the right direction. And Mario's done that. He's gotten better at being a leader as well every single year. And he's been doing this for a while now. Obviously, he started his college career, a few minutes away at FIU, and then of course he went over to Oregon. So he's had a long coaching tenure. He's had a lot of ups and downs, but I think I can confidently say that this version of Mario Cristobal is the best that he's been throughout his entire coaching career. He's been wonderful to Miami, and it's important to mention this too. But Cristobal, he played at Miami. He was an offensive lineman at Miami. So to see someone who's familiar with the program, who played big time college football at this program, for a person of his caliber and with that background to come in and rebuild this entire program and give us the brightest future we've had in so long. It's been nothing but wonderful to see, and I think that just that alone should make Canes fans appreciate him even more. He's been wonderful.
No, absolutely. And you brought up the whole, CEO thing and being able to guide the ship. I feel like that's absolutely important, especially in today's day and age of college football, to where it's all about NIL and all with the eligibility years, which I don't really
Yeah,
want to get into the eligibility and how much of a joke that is. I would
it's
say it's
confusing.
very much a joke, but yeah, I feel like the thing that you brought up too is that he has improved every single year that he has been in Miami, which I absolutely agree, especially, watching some of the games last year. I feel like the only real knock I really have against Cristobal personally as an objective person is really getting his team ready for the not so big games.
Oh yeah.
The Stanfords last year with Florida State. I feel like that's the really only knock that I personally have against him, because I feel like I never question him when it comes to getting his team ready for the big games, as we saw in the playoffs last year. Obviously, taking down A&M, as a UT fan, that makes me very happy that to watch them beat A&M. With Ohio State and Ole Miss too. Those were I never questioned it, that he was definitely right, that he got his guys ready. But I feel like especially the wild factor, which is the ACC, and how you know what I would say is definitely this has got to be the year they should be in consideration for ACC championship, but you just don't know, because I guess to start getting into it with the teams, that I would at least consider contenders or could be contenders, just because of great coaching staff and continuity, which is another thing this team does have. They do have a lot of continuity together from last year to this year. But yeah, Virginia, they're still going to be a really good team this year. I do like Virginia a lot. Pitt is another team I genuinely do like a lot, especially defensively. I do like, but I know they have a really good quarterback too. SMU, for whatever reason, Kevin Jennings is still playing college football. I thought he has definitely retired at this point, but I guess not. And Georgia Tech, I feel like Brett Key, he's a great coach, and I know that Mendoza's brother is coach is QB there, but other than that, I genuinely am a really big fan of how Georgia Tech really has been coached over the past couple of years under him, under Brett Key. And I guess an honorable mention to Louisville too. Is another team that I feel like they could be a good team. It's definitely a wild card of a team, sort of like Clemson is a wild card of a team because of how wildly inconsistent they've been. But yeah, this is definitely a very intriguing year for the ACC as a whole.
No, yeah, and as I talk about that, I'm gonna go back to the point that you mentioned when you were transitioning to this. Definitely one of the biggest problems for Miami, not just in the Cristobal tenure, but pretty much ever since they won their last national title back in 2001, 2002. Um, Miami's always had a bad habit of losing to teams that they should not lose to, and that's one of the biggest reasons why they haven't won a national title since two or haven't been to a national title game. In the span of 2003 to 2024, they never made a national title game appearance. And in that span, one of the biggest reasons why is because they've lost games that they should not have lost to. Miami has never had an issue getting up for the big games. Whenever we play the Florida States of the world, the Floridas, the Notre Dames, or any other big time, prime time, non conference matchup with a highly ranked team, Miami usually plays well in those games. Whether win or lose, they play well, and you always walk away from the TV saying, okay, at least they prepared. Like you knew that they were ready to play this game. But on the other hand, they've had losses to teams that they should not lose to. Like last season, it was SMU and Louisville. You should have beaten those two teams. Yeah, they're two good teams, but you should have beaten them. The year before that, with Cam Moore, they lost to Syracuse,
Yeah.
inexcusable. They lost to Georgia Tech in a game that they should have won. You know what I mean? I mean, Miami, they've lost to teams like North Carolina in the past, late in the season in November. November especially has been the month of hell. I think all Miami Hurricanes fans can agree that November is the month from hell. That's been our biggest hurdle. November's been our biggest hurdle. Um, you know, and Virginia Tech is another team that has posed problems for us. So, we've always had issues with teams that were better than on paper. Now this season, you going into this season, you mentioned, yeah, there's a couple other teams that are good. You mentioned Pitt, SMU, Louisville, of course, they're going to be dark horse contenders. But make no mistake about it. Miami, this is out of all the years that they've been favorites to win the ACC, this is the year that they should do it, and this is the year that they have to. There's no excuse. You look at the schedule. The schedule is extremely manageable. This is probably one of the easiest schedules in the entire country, and one of the easiest schedules for all Power Four conference teams. If you look at the schedule, Miami doesn't play a team with a pulse in the first month. They go at Stanford. Stanford sucks. They should win that game easily. I'm sorry. No disrespect to Stanford, but you guys are nerds. You guys cannot play football, and you guys stink. That's why you haven't been very good in so long. We should beat them easily. But, you play Stanford. You play Florida A&M. That's a cupcake game. Then you go on the road again to Wake Forest. You should beat Wake Forest. No excuse. Another cupcake game with Central Michigan to end the month of September. Then this is where stuff starts getting a little good. You open up October with a road game in Memorial Stadium against Clemson. Now, say what you want about Clemson. I know I have my gripes with Clemson. I think Dabo Sweeney has fallen off drastically as a head coach, and so has Clemson. But playing in Memorial Stadium is always tough. It doesn't matter if Clemson is number one or the worst team in the ACC. Playing them in their stadium is always pretty tough. So that game could pose problems for us, especially because it's still relatively early in the season. Again, the first game to kick off October, so you never know. There's always a game that catches you. So that game could be tough. But then you have a bye week, and then you play Florida State. Yeah, it's a rivalry game, but this is probably the least appealing rivalry game that I could think of in a long time. Florida State has been horrendous for the last several years. They're completely lost. I'm not trying to say anything, but Miami should win that game easily. I'm sorry, but Florida State is horrendous. Then, of course, you mentioned Pitt. Pitt is going to be another, you know, challenging game because they're always a respectable team under Pat Narduzzi. And then you end October against North Carolina on the road. I like to call them the North Carolina Gold Diggers because of what's going on with Bill Belichick. Uh, shout out Bill Belichick, whatever, I guess. But yeah, so you got UNC in Chapel Hill. I'm sorry, I don't think UNC's seeing any resurrection under Bill Belichick, especially with what's going on over there. And then, of course, the big game, November. Of course, my number one hated rival. I hate them so much, more than Florida State. You have Notre Dame. That by far is going to be the game that's going to determine what's going to go on as far as playoff seeding. Miami hasn't won a game in Notre Dame Stadium in South Bend since 1988, if I'm not mistaken. So
Hmm.
it's been a long, long, long time. Or as a matter of fact, 85. I could be wrong. It was in the 80s, but regardless, it's been a long time since Miami has won in South Bend. Of course, a big reason for that is because these two schools really don't play each other too much. Uh, but yeah, that's huge. You got to win that game somehow, some way. And if you do win that game, then you really start establishing yourself as okay. This team could really be, top four, maybe in the CFP projections. Whatever that is. But yeah, so that's a game. And then at the end of the season, you have three straight home games. You have Duke, you know, Vatech with James Franklin, and Boston College. I mean, Boston College is going to be awful. Duke is Duke. They're a team that can be beaten easily, and we just took their quarterback and number one wide receiver, so they're not going to be as good as last year. Good. I use that term loosely because they weren't very good. But you have Duke, you have Boston College, and Vatech, who yes, they have James Franklin, but they're rebuilding. So to go back to what I said, this schedule is very manageable, and you're not playing a lot of really good teams. So this is the year that Miami should win the ACC. If they don't, it'll be an embarrassment, the biggest embarrassment out of all of them.
Well, I absolutely would agree with that. I do think out of all the years, because they've yet to really win the ACC since joining, yeah, this is definitely the year to do it. Uh, yeah, I'm kind of would am a lot. Excuse me, I am very interested with the Clemson game because I mean, look, I know Clemson. They open up at LSU in Death Valley, but man, Dabo Sweeney, man. I mean, I really do like Dabo a lot. He's a great coach. Seems like a great guy to be around. But man, that I don't know what's going on with Clemson, man. It just seems like they have. It's so weird around it, and now they're starting to like add people in the transport. But we'll see how it is. But I think that's probably one of the biggest tests to like really open up the year, especially with it being within the first week of October. But Florida State, it's always going to be a big game because it's a rivalry game. I really do like the Pitt game a lot. I feel like this is also going to be a good test for Miami, especially with that offense of theirs. Pitt's always kind of known for producing defensive talent.
Yeah,
Most notably, my guy Aaron Donald. Shout
yeah,
out to the real AD. But yeah, Notre Dame, man. I mean, man, I didn't even realize that it's really been that long that they've really won a game there because I don't even remember really Notre Dame ever hosting the Canes for as long as I guess
yeah,
I've started watching college football.
yeah.
Back in the early 2010s. But man,
It's been rare.
um, well, it doesn't help that they're also a independent school when
I know.
they're ACC school, but
Yeah, I don't get that. I
that,
don't
that
like
that that's a whole other conversation for another time. But yeah, that's definitely a game that's circled on my calendar at least for a game that I have the most interest in to watch. And finally, Virginia Tech. I'm just gonna say this as a guy that I'm not the biggest James Franklin fan ever.
Yeah, me neither.
I definitely think this guy is yeah, Virginia Tech, cool. They haven't seen a lot of success probably since Michael Vick, but the one thing people should know, I always will say, is especially when that week comes for Virginia Tech, James Franklin is not known for big games. It's
Yeah,
been a
not good.
thing of his career that he has not done well at all in these big games. So just please remember that, people. I guess now since we covered the schedule, I feel like now it's a good time to talk about the players on this team. That I know you brought up a lot of transfers that came in. I know one of the people that I'm really kind of intrigued by, personally is with Mensa. Really, as a guy that from when he's playing at Duke last year, there's a lot of skill sets I really see with this guy that I personally think could really make him a top 10 quarterback in the country, man. There's a lot of skill sets I really see with him. I really am interested to see what Chris Wall does with a guy like him. I know Carson Beck is coming. Carson Beck last year. I have my opinions of him. Do I think he's good? Not necessarily, but he's not necessarily bad. He's a happy medium of both. It's like I guess I don't know. I don't know what's a good comparison for Carson Beck, but Carson Beck is an interesting guy in terms of having to watch him play quarterback. But I feel like Mensa, he can definitely be a true talent for this team. Especially the I guess the second best quarterback talent they've had since Carson is not Carson Beck, excuse me, because that's the freaking Hall of Fame game. Cam Ward, I should say, the second best quarterback talent that I've seen the Canes have in a while since Cam Ward came along. I think Mensa definitely has the ceiling potential to be a top 10, top 5 quarterback. But I guess lastly, before I turn to you, the other two notable returns to this offense is obviously Malachi Tony and Mark Fletcher, two great offensive weapons to have, especially with Mensa at the helm.
No, yeah, absolutely. And the obviously the big news or the big get for Miami in the offseason, transfer portal or recruiting, um, is Darian Mensa. Obviously, he comes over from Duke, one of the most established quarterbacks in the country. Uh, you mentioned, he definitely could be a top 10, top 5 quarterback in the country. He's definitely has the tools to be that guy. And obviously, he wasn't given that title mainly because he played at Duke. I mean, status for that always comes with where you play, and Duke has never been a school that is known for producing great football talent at all. So he's definitely flown under the radar for most of his career, but definitely burst big onto the scene last year. I think he led the ACC in passing yards and passing touchdowns. So he's a dual threat type. I mean, he's not like Cam Ward, where Cam Ward is like Mike Vick from Madden 2004, where he's running around the field everywhere. He's not like that, but he can certainly keep. He certainly has legs. He can run the ball. Uh, he can extend plays. He could, run out of the pocket, throw on the run. He has a really good arm. There's no doubt about it. Darian Mensa is one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and he's for sure going to be one of those guys that, listen, I know this sounds crazy, but he could very much end the year in Heisman Trophy conversations because he does have the tools. He has the weapons. You look at what he brought over, or what Miami has brought over from the transfer portal. First of all, you brought over his number one receiver, Cooper Barkate. Cooper Barkate last year had well over 1,000 receiving yards, 7 touchdown catches, led Duke in receiving yards, number one receiver. So bringing his number one guy over, you already have that chemistry there, and somebody that Mence is used to working with. But then they also brought Vandrevius Jacobs from South Carolina and Cam Vaughn from West Virginia, who are both really good receivers as well. They're going to be good depth options, probably be wide receiver number 3, number 4. And then, of course, you have, you know, baby Jesus, still with Malachi Tony. So, Mensa definitely has a lot of weapons for sure. And, it's going to be nice to see what he does with this offense. But, other than Mensa, and yes, by the way, I did forget to mention that, yes, you are right. I mean, he's by far one of the top 2 quarterbacks that we've had here in terms of talent. I mean, we have had some good quarterbacks in the past, like N'Kosi Perry and Malik Rozier and Stephen Morris. But come on, like let's be honest, it's this guy and Cam Moore, Carson Beck number 3. I think Carson Beck was solid, um, and of course, winning does elevate your status, so that's why I have him number 3. But yeah, Carson Beck, he has his flaws, but again, certainly a guy that teams could win with, and we found that out last year. But certainly, definitely an upgrade at the quarterback position. Um, and then other than that, transfer portal wise, I know we're gonna touch on this, but the defense obviously suffered some key losses as well. The same way how we lost Carson Beck on the offense from last year, the defense now has some missing holes. You lose Ruben Bain, you lose Akeem Mesidor, 2 of the top pass rushers in the country last year. But, you still have some veterans on the defensive line. You still have Marquise Lightfoot, Justin Scott, and Ahmad Moten as your left defensive end, nose tackle, and your regular defensive tackle in the middle. But you also brought in Damon Wilson from Missouri, who's another good transfer. He's gonna bring back some of the pass rushing that we've lacked, or that we've now missing now. Without Bain and Mesidor, so he's gonna add some of that pass rushing ability back. And this defense overall didn't have too many things to tweak, but that is something to talk about, was the defensive line. But yeah, they got Damon Wilson, and they also got Keanu Davis from Nebraska. He's gonna fit in really well on the defensive line. He's not gonna, he could be a starter. He could not, but even if he's not a starter, he's gonna be in the rotation. The one thing to note about this Miami defensive line, they have solid depth. They have good starters, like I mentioned, Lightfoot, Scott, Moten, and now Wilson. He's definitely going to start. The transfer from Missouri, Damon Wilson. But they also have depth. I just mentioned Keanu Davis. They also brought in Jarquez Carter from Ohio State, who has a lot to prove. And they still have Armando Blunt, who was here last year. So they have a lot of depth at the defensive line position. But those are, the best transfers they got. And then one more before I throw it over to you, or really two things, transfer portal wise. They brought in Omar Thornton, a safety from Boston College. He's gonna start. He's gonna play the nickel back position. Uh, the Canes did lose two starters from the secondary in both Jacoby Thomas and Keontae Scott to the NFL draft. So that's why they brought him in. Omar Thornton is a really good, underrated safety. Like I said, he will play nickelback. Comes over from Boston College. The number one thing to know about him, he's a hard hitter. Very, very physical. He hits extremely hard. And then the kicker position, I know special teams is something that we don't like to talk about, but it's necessary to. The kicker position is up for debate now. It's a competition, an open competition. Last year's starter Carter Davis, of course, is gone. So Mario Cristobal ended up bringing two kickers. He brought in Jake Weinberg from nearby Florida State, and he also brought Jack Olson from Northwestern of the Big Ten. So both of those guys are going to get competition, and we'll see who comes out as the starting as the starter for the kicker position. Excuse me. My guess is that it'll be Jack Olson because last year Jake Weinberg had like a really bad time kicking field goals, 12 and 19 last year, while Jack Olson, he's been one of the best kickers in the Big Ten at Northwestern. So the kicking competition is also open, and like I mentioned, you bring in the slew of receivers, the defensive back in Thornton, and of course the defensive lineman in Davis and Damon Wilson.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'll touch on special teams too, since for a guy like me, whenever I played college ball for Division 3, just so people know, yeah, special teams is a very big thing to me. Obviously, I was great friends with a lot of these guys, who were kickers, punters, and long snappers. So, so shout outs to y'all, man. Y'all do a lot of good things that don't get enough appreciation. But yeah, I didn't even know that the Weinberg guy was the Florida State guy, but probably, yeah, it's going to probably be the Olsen person that's going to get a majority of the reps probably throughout fall camp if I had to put my best educated guess forward. But um, other than that, I just want to get my little special teams rant out of the way because special teams is important. But I feel like the biggest question mark in terms of this team really this year, I feel like most people have kind of said this too, is really with the defensive line. Obviously you losing two great talented guys like that with Bain and uh,
Mesidor, yeah.
Mesidor. Thank you. Sorry,
Yeah.
that Dave slipped my nine for 5 seconds, but losing two of those guys is obviously going to be a really hurtful thing, to have, because you don't have them anymore. But obviously there's a lot of good names on this defensive line still that are still there and came in through the transfer portal, and you do wonder, man, like just how good or what's certain roles of a lot of these guys. But in my opinion, honestly, as long as they can be a good, pass rushing team, can get the quarterback a good amount of times. They don't need great. They don't need to be an all time, level. You just got to be good enough to, to do your job, to do your 111 and to get the QB and stop the run. That's all you need to do. You don't need to do anything crazy. Just do your job. And that's personally, as long as they do that, they're going to be a good defensive line group. Um, Other than that, yeah, I'm not gonna sit here and act like I know all the linebackers in the world as a guy myself that did play linebacker, but the one thing I've learned definitely from playing college ball and playing football for the majority of my life is like, hey, the D line is the game's won in the trenches, obviously, especially defensively. Those defensive line guys, they have a big role to obviously, to help out the guys like the linebackers and the safeties to basically, get people down or help people, Yeah, it's all football related stuff, but it's all jargon that everybody's heard before. But other than that, yeah, the defensive line definitely, in my opinion, has the most improved this year, especially with who's gone and who's still there.
No, yeah, the defense is unquestionably, both sides of the ball coming into the season have a lot of talent. The offense has a lot of talent. Certainly some turnover, but a lot of talent. But the defense, eh, it's going to be great, and it could be even better than last year. Ruben Bain, he got drafted by Tampa Bay in the NFL, and shortly before he got drafted, I forgot what he was doing. He was being interviewed for some media outlet or something, and he did mention that this defense, and in particular the defensive line, could be better than last year's, and I certainly agree because, like I just mentioned, you still have several starters on the line, and plus you're adding in a couple new guys who are gonna add to the pass rushing that Corey Heatherman likes. Obviously, Corey Heatherman is the defensive coordinator, and for the type of defense we run, which is the 4-2-5 defense, that's one of the most important aspects. You need a defensive line that's going to have guys that are going to stuff, stuff the trenches, stuff the run, get after the passer, and we have that. But the great thing is that it's not just the defensive line; it's everything else. Like, this defense brings back most of the compartments, most of the pieces that ended up having success last season. The linebackers, you have Mohamed Toure, who's coming back for his last year. Obviously, last year he came in from Rutgers. Obviously, that's a school that I know well because I live near Rutgers, so I know what he was bringing. Very physical, very talented linebacker who's very good at stuffing the run and playing pass coverage if needed. So you bring him back, and then now, of course, they had to get a new linebacker, so they brought in Chase Smith. Um, who is going to be the starter now. Like I said, he was on the roster last year, but he was more of a rotational piece. He had 31 tackles last year, but it's nice that you have somebody stepping in who's been a part of the system. So that's a benefit. But in the secondary, you have OJ Frederick, you have Bryce Fitzgerald, Zachariah Poyser, and Ethan O'Connor. All those guys were either starters or saw significant time in the secondary last season for Miami. So, needless to say, this unit is going to be better than last year because you have a lot of pieces that were here, that know the system, that already know what their jobs are. They have great chemistry, and they already know how to play with each other. So, I'm very excited to see how good this year's defense can be compared to last year's.
No, absolutely. That was the name I was trying to think of too of notable defensive players that were on this team this year was the son of Larry Fitzgerald, who which makes me feel old in a lot of ways, but but I am curious to see what he does. I know I think I saw an interview with him. I think he's put on a few pounds of weight, muscle, and he's talked about how something with Mario Cristobal is some weird comment, but yeah, I'm really curious to see what he could do. Not only just because I'm interested to see what the son of Larry Fitzgerald could do, but just the talent that he provides. Just it's certainly an intriguing part of it. But yeah, I guess going now from a team, what they're looking like is now what I want to do is just look at it from like a broader scope. Obviously, this team is ranked number 7 right now in the coaches poll, which I know the coaches poll doesn't mean anything right now, but it's something to make note of. But playoff wise, man, it is sort of interesting to look at. I do personally think this team will be a playoff team because I do think they are a really good team for a lot of good reasons, and that they're certainly a lot better than a lot of these other SEC teams that I've seen that that are not really all that great. But yeah, it's certainly. I mean, obviously, we don't know where they're going to be at right now from now recording in August till then. But I feel like playoffs is definitely going to be a thing to where is most interesting to me because obviously, the thing that you don't want them to be is a team with a bye because a lot of teams with a bye, with the exception to Indiana last year, but that Indiana team was just a really good coach team and they had a lot going for them, in my opinion, at least. But certainly a thing to keep in mind is like, hey, you don't want to be one of those bye teams that gets a bye. You want a team to host a playoff game. I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously you want to host a playoff game at Hard Rock Stadium because, hey, the only real playoff game that they truly have to win there than the Miami Dolphins will probably ever have in a playoff game. But so it's just something to keep in mind, just as we approach, the season, is for this team is really about the playoffs, because I feel like, yeah, it's now or never for this team to win a national championship, just like it's for a lot of these other programs that are in the same situation. But it's kind of like some of my closing remarks here as we get close to wrapping up here.
Yeah, for sure. The postseason conversation. Certainly, Miami is already in discussion for that. I mean, as they should be, because as we've already mentioned, they've have a lot of talent, and they're coming off of a run to the national championship game last year. So, of course, several new pieces, but for the majority of the roster, you're seeing a lot of the guys who were here last year. So, um, one thing that I want to mention real quick too is the offensive line. I think that's going to be something that we got to focus on, or take a look at as the season progresses, because the offensive line has a lot of new pieces. A lot of the guys that were here last year are gone. So you have a new left tackle in Jackson Cantwell, who's the number 2 overall prospect in this year's recruiting class. So he's coming over. He has a lot of expectations, a lot of hype surrounding him. We'll see how he does as a true freshman. He's going to start at left tackle. You also have Samson Okunlola, who was here last year. He did start in the Cotton Bowl against Ohio State, but still needs a lot of experience as a starter. But he'll be the left guard. Then you have Ryan Rodriguez, who's the new center, Max Buchanan, who's the new right guard, and the only major starter that's coming back is Matthew McCoy, who made 15 starts last year at right tackle. He's going to be there again, so that's something to keep an eye on. But yeah, the postseason conversation, they deserve to be in it. They deserve to at least be an early. If people like to do that at home, an early bracket, early predictions, whatever, then you could pencil in Miami as one of those 12 teams in the bracket. Um, to be honest, the postseason possibility, it's going to come down to what we do in ACC play and the Notre Dame game, because I mentioned it when talking about it. The schedule is fairly easy. This is a very manageable schedule that the Canes should take advantage of. So it is an advantage, but at the same time, it's not, from the standpoint of, okay, you can't really have too many screw ups here, because if you do, then you're not going to be in consideration at all. But it's going to come down to what we do in ACC play, and what happens in the Notre Dame game. If this team is undefeated in conference play, which is very possible, and if they win the ACC championship, well, they could win the ACC championship and still lose a game in conference play. That's the thing. You could lose the game to Notre Dame, and you could lose one conference game, still make it to the conference title game, win it, and still get in. So if they have two losses, which I hope not, but if they have two losses, they could still get in, because they'll most likely be in the conference title game, and with that they could win. Of course, the I think the rule is, every major conference winner, they get an automatic bid into the postseason bracket. So that's a possibility, to go 10-2, win the conference title game, and still make it in. But you're probably gonna have to win a lot of these ACC games, and to prevent any mishap of making the playoffs, because this Notre Dame game is going to be the signature game. It's one of the top games of the season, throughout the whole season. In all of college football, it's a game that's going to determine the postseason seeding. So yeah, it's going to come down to, what did you do in ACC play, and did you beat Notre Dame? If you won all your conference games, then there's a good chance you're getting in. If not, you could still get in, but the chances are slimmer. So yeah, it's definitely going to be that.
No, absolutely. And I guess here I'll talk about now with some of the keys that I really do think that are going to be very valuable to this team to be a national championship contending team is, obviously, for one, just one of the things I brought up at the very beginning, they got to win the games that they're supposed to win, because that Chris Paul is going to have these guys ready for Clemson, for Florida State, for Pitt, for Notre Dame, obviously. But it's all these other games that they got to win first before they win those types of games. The other thing I will say is a very much a key thing is really seeing the true continued development of Darian Mensah and really seeing if, I guess a guy like him and a guy, also another guy who has a lot to prove this year at the power four level. I keep wanting to say power five because it's a
Yeah.
constant thing that I'm so used to saying, but power four level. But a guy like Mensah, you know, and another guy too at Oklahoma State with Drew Messamaker. Both those guys have a lot to prove this year in terms of how much of their success playing at their respective school. Obviously, one of them plays for a Group of Five school while the other one played at Duke. But you definitely want to see how much you can really get out of them, how good they truly are against better competition. While obviously the ACC is a true wild card of the conference, but you definitely want to see a lot of consistency out of Mensa. Um, Defensively too is I think one of the things that they were truly good at last year, in my opinion, was really just being a good pass rush defense. I lost count how many times they were truly good at getting off the line, being really good at getting at the quarterback and creating turnovers. That was definitely a thing that as a defensive guy, I really like to see because I play defense, but I do think too it is a true thing that you want to see how this team do a lot of this year. It's generate turnovers, generate a lot of pressures, generate sacks because those things that a lot of last year's teams did, is going to be very important for them to not only win the ACC but to be a true possibility to win a national championship.
Yeah, of course. Defensive line. That's like you said. That's going to be one of the make or break. Um, aspects of the team. Can they do what last year's unit did? But they have the potential to do so. So, but yeah, it's we're gonna see where this team goes. Me personally, I'm excited for this year. Knowing the year that we had last year, uh, I could confidently say this is the best that this program has been. In the last 25 years, it's been a long time to get here, but we're finally back as a relevant and notable college football team, a college football powerhouse. Uh, you know, we're back to our old ways. A lot of people are reluctant to say that for whatever reason, but the fact of the matter is that this program is heading in the right direction, and they're in a great spot, and they have the potential to be, uh, national champions this season. I don't see why they wouldn't have a chance to do that. Um, and they're Mario Cristobal. His rebuilding project. At least to me, I'm gonna say this: his rebuilding project is complete. Now it's all about a matter of winning. How many games can you win, and can you win that national championship? Can you bring that sixth and elusive national championship to Coral Gables? Let's see if we can get it done this year. But yeah, it's going to be an exciting year, and Hurricanes fans should definitely be excited.
No, absolutely. As I know September 4th cannot come any closer, not only for me as a football fan, but for many other football fans out there. But other than that, when we're, as we're wrapping up here, tomorrow will be the series recaps for the Miami Marlins as, they played the final game of the Pittsburgh Pirates series today at, noon my time, but 1 o'clock Eastern
Yeah.
time. Tyler Phillips versus Ashcraft. It's going to be an interesting matchup. We'll see what happens today. Other than that, yeah, always, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video with as much people as you can, as we're still starting out this channel and starting to produce more and more of these videos, slowly talk more about football, which is my favorite sport. But other than that, yeah, we'll be back at it tomorrow, and that's all I got.
All right, everybody, take care.